Now, as you'd expect, debate commentary went viral across social media and left political pollsters calculating the impact on public opinion. Renowned campaign strategist and pollster Frank Luntz tweeted this in after hours. Not that I think it'll happen, but the only way Biden can cancel out last night's debate is to speak in front of live cameras every day for the rest of the campaign and act like his former self. And I'm very happy to say Frank joins us now. Great to have you with us, Frank. I guess box day one tick in terms of a live performance. What did you make of the difference between the two presidents in the space of 24 hours? And does it make a difference?
It does make a difference. I had not seen that footage. I was shocked that Biden did not show up yesterday. That Biden was powerful and direct and was clear. The Biden that showed up last night, I've never seen before. And quite frankly, the challenge for Joe Biden right now, 51 million people watched that debate. That's the bad news. The good news for Joe Biden is that the first debate in 2020 was watched by just over 70 million people. So clearly some people aren't paying attention. That said, the split screen, seeing Donald Trump here and Joe Biden here and watching it side by side, the damage that does to Biden's perceptions, to his reputation is significant. And in the end, you can fix a misstatement. You can even fix a mistake, but you cannot fix age. It's with you, whether you like it or not. And from walking on stage, like you see him do right there compared to Donald Trump, and the times when I did not understand a word that he was saying, that's significant. Every time Biden spoke, he dropped. And here's what's interesting, last point. Many of the times that Donald Trump spoke, he dropped as well. If Trump says less, Trump actually does better. If Biden says less, Biden does better. So it's we're in for a really difficult 5-month campaign.
Yeah, leaders are better off not speaking. I think that says a great deal. I think one of the differences between the president that we saw Friday, the president that we saw Thursday, was, I guess, back on autocue. What you can say about the debate that we watched last night, there was no autocue, there were no cue cards, there's no AI involved, there's no lying about what we saw, it was unvarnished. What's also fascinating about what you were doing at that time was that you were holding a focus group of undecided voters from 6 key battleground states. They voted both Democrat and Republican over the past 10 years. I just want to give our viewers a listen to what they said after the debate performance.
He does not seem composed. He seems like he is literally about to be on death's door.
He's lost. He can't complete a thought. He seems weak and fragile.
I thought he was going to be a little more forceful tonight, similar to the State of the Union. I'm just surprised at how he looks decrepit, frankly.
And Frank, you asked them how the debate moved their vote preference, and you got the definition of a swing.
I was shocked. 12 of the 14 are now voting for Donald Trump. 1 of the 14 is now voting for Joe Biden, and 1 of the 14 is undecided. We never have this. This was significant, but let me make something even more clear to the audience. It's not just that Joe Biden didn't bring over any undecideds. It's that more than half that group want Joe Biden to step aside and want someone else to run on the Democratic ticket. I want to be clear about this. The hostility towards Donald Trump as an individual, as a person, is significant among the undecideds. They really do not like him. They don't like his demeanor. They don't like his negativity. They don't like his insults. But they're afraid of Joe Biden. As one of the people said, which is probably the best quote of the entire evening, Joe Biden wants 4 more years. I'm not convinced he's going to make 4 more months. And I don't know how to emphasize this enough. The undecideds don't like either candidate. They're not undecided choosing between 2 great choices. They're deciding which candidate they dislike less and frankly, which candidate they think will do less damage to the country. And based on last night's debate, Trump won overwhelmingly those undecided voters.
Do you expect to see that in the polls, Frank? Because if you go back a few weeks and we look at the expectations of what Trump being found guilty in a New York court might do, it barely had any impact on the polls. Fast forward to today, do you expect to see some kind of sustainable adjustment in the polls to reflect what you're saying?
Well, first, you're absolutely correct. If you average all the surveys, Donald Trump was found guilty of 34 felonies, and he dropped only 2 points in the surveys. Right. And by the way, the numbers that viewers should be looking at are not the national numbers. They don't matter. We don't elect people by popular votes. There are only 3 states that matter: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I expect Donald Trump to go up a couple points. That's it in those states. But that's going to put Trump in the lead in every single swing state. If Trump wins none of those states, he still gets 268 electoral votes, but that's 2 votes short of a majority. He has to win one of those 3. Based on the debate performance, I'm expecting Trump to be leading in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, but within the margin of error and still too close to call. No one is undecided. Everyone has picked a choice, and those who still haven't made up their minds simply hate both candidates.
Okay. So some of the discussion today has been that perhaps there will now be pressure from the Democratic leadership. Trump, let's say he's incumbent and he's remaining, there will be pressure from the Democrats to say to President Biden, look, you have to step aside in the best interests of the party, in the best interest of voters and the country. We can debate the mechanism over how and if that might happen. If he doesn't step aside, someone said to me today that there will be a wave election, that the Republicans will win the House, the Senate, and the White House as a result. How do you respond to that, Frank, based on what you're seeing?
I don't believe that.
Okay.
As a pollster, I don't see this dominant push for the Republicans or this really strong movement for the Democrats. We're split on abortion. We're split on affordability. We're split on immigration. We're split by age, by gender, by ethnicity. America is a viciously divided country, really angry with each other. I think the Republicans have a better than 50-50 shot of winning the Senate. I think that the Democrats have a 50-50 shot of taking the House. And quite frankly, Trump has the advantage right now in the presidency, but it's not significant. It's not 1984. It's not even Barack Obama in 2012 or 2008. We are so divided, so angry, and I'm as concerned about the state of the democracy as I am the state of the election. I'm more concerned of what happens to us when we emerge from all of this as opposed to election night itself. Because if you have a 272 to 268 election, if you have a Senate that's evenly 50-50, if you have a House where one side has a 1 or 2 seat majority, and we're almost there now, then you can't get anything done, and every single day is a pitched battle. Well, unfortunately, that's where we are as a country. I don't think the debate helped that at all. The loser wasn't just Donald Trump. I think the loser was the American people, and I'm very pessimistic, frankly. And I know you want to hear me say something positive, but I'm very pessimistic over the next 5 months because I see no one and nothing that's trying to do anything positive, anything visionary, and anything focused on the future. I know you got to get out, but one last point. The single biggest complaint was not the negativity. The biggest complaint in my focus group is that all the candidates, both of them, are talking about the past, and none of them are talking about the future. I'm going to emphasize that. If you want to win the presidency, if you want to take over Congress, don't tell people what you've done. Tell them exactly what you plan to do.
Yeah, give people hope. And Frank, I'm an eternal optimist, but I'm also a realist at times. And I think what you just said there is the key, that the loser last night was the American people, and they deserve better. Frank,
By
a
the way,
pleasure
I
to
do want
chat
to
to you.
hold on. Don't cut me off. I
Now
want to
you're
give
going to get me
CNN
told off.
credit.
Go on.
I know this. Our focus group loved the moderators. They loved the process. They thought CNN did an outstanding job. Y'all, congratulations. You put together an excellent debate.
Thank you, sir. You're welcome back. Pollster and campaign strategist there, Frank Luntz. So we'll speak to you again. Great to get your wisdom.